of sufficient commercial, institutional, recreational, and transit destinations that satisfy the daily needs and desires of all demographic and age groups within walking distance from homes and workplaces. If we look at the breakdown of these 4,000 establishments we found, most of them are retailers in Bugis. Bugis is a huge retail destination. A lot of them are food establishments, over 500 of them in that one little buffer. And there's a lot of service provisions as well. And if we then look into the particular categories individually, the retailers are, I mean, you find 448 electronic stores in that little area alone. You find 324 women's clothes and apparel stores and 38 bookstores. So it goes into enormous diversity. And if we plot the different institutions and establishments on a single map, you get a very colorful picture and a very fine-grained picture. The businesses are not only on the ground floors. We documented their distributions by floor, and you find that, yes, most are on the ground, but if you cumulatively add up the level 2, level 3, level 4, in fact, you find even more businesses on the other levels off the ground. So it's a three-dimensional environment which is full of opportunity and very diverse. We did some network analysis on this. This picture, which is a little faded out, but it shows you if we then analyze from any one of these doors of the establishments, if we were to walk in any directions from them in a very local walking radius, something like 200 meters, which is just a couple of minute walk, how many businesses of a certain type would we find? So we did this, in this case, for food establishments, and you see that in the most intense locations, if you walk from any of these doors, 200 meters in any directions, you can find up to 150 food establishments in that buffer alone. And there are certain concentrations, of course. This is right next to Simlin Square. There's a lot of food there. Part of the Bugis Street edges and Haji Lane and the Arab Street area are very intense on food. If you do this for retailers, not food, this is shops where you can buy things, then the uncontested winner is Bugis Street. Bugis Street alone in one block has almost 800 vendors that are independent. So it's a high concentration. It's almost like a bazaar designed to be such. But there's also other high density destinations like Simlin Square for particular electronics goods, etc. So there's a huge amount of convenience we can do this for different types of demographic needs. And finally, diversity. Which to us indicates the plurality and choices of destinations that go beyond the basic needs and fulfill the more subtle human desires of interaction, stimulation, and imagination, and which basically bring people to encounter other people, places, and activities in the course of daily use of the built environment. So when we talk about diversity, in our case, we don't think about the absolute immediate need for one convenience store, one subway stop, one post office, but we talk about diversity in ways that a neighborhood just makes us bigger, introduces us to things that we didn't actually demand, but they are available, and we think this is a very desirable quality, and the sort of cities that Singapore competes with really compete at this level, which is not the bare minimum first necessity, but which is the extras that the built environment offers. And we basically looked at ways of where urban design and spatial configuration can actually affect diversity. So we found that there's ways of providing diversity through access, through generating encounters, and through offering choices. What do I mean by this? First, access. This is a famous example of an urban grid which happens to be extremely diverse in its nature. This is in Savannah, Georgia. And if you think about the Manhattan grid, which has basically two types of streets, north-south avenues and east-west streets, then you only have a couple of parcel or lot types. In the grid of Savannah, there's a whole series of street types and parcel types. And you have fundamentally in every ward 7 different topological types of parcels, and the differentiation here is based on what kind of street do they face onto. So there's this DNA in every block of Savannah where there's buildings that have fundamentally different qualities. If you are on this building, you face a smaller, quieter back street, and you probably pay lower rent than on this building, which faces the main street. If you're on the side, you face a pretty heavily trafficked north-south street. You're on the corner. And these longer buildings were actually kept for public use in the original plan, and they still are. So the diversity is encoded into the accessibility of these parcels. The same thing with street types. There's fundamentally 7 different types of streets. If you continue these streets up and down and left and right, the experience you get along moving these streets differs. So this is one way of urban design generating this, and we find these sorts of differences also in boogies. Second, urban design can generate, maximize or minimize or optimize encounters. This difference between the Savannah grid and New York grid that I mentioned, if we count how many other parcels do you encounter in a 10-minute walking radius in Manhattan or a 10-minute walking radius in Savannah, we find a very different answer. In Manhattan, parcels are extremely skinny and form a very narrow street front, at least in the original plan. A lot of them have now been amalgamated. They're almost as skinny as the ones in Singapore, the 4-meter, 5-meter shophouse fronts. And because of that quality, there's very deep parcels. In the grid of New York or Manhattan, we find over 2,000 other parcels in a 10-minute walk. Whereas in the Savannah plan, this is roughly 650. And this is purely an effect of urban design. This is an effect that results from the way the parcels and streets are laid out. So there's an encoded opportunity of encounters because of urban design, because of how densely the ground plan is laid out, which contributes to this culture of congestion, as Rem Koolhaas has called it. And we see that in Singapore as well. And I just plotted, for example, a walking route. If we started our walk from the fourth floor of Simblin Square and took a walk down and went to Boogie's MRT, which is a common connection to make, then I plotted what kinds and how many businesses are on that walk. How many things are we likely to pass along the way? And we find that there's 86 establishments on that particular walk, and they are of these categories. So using network analysis and this kind of very fine-grained data we collect, we can actually simulate and understand how much diversity and intensity is being produced by these urban design. And the last category of diversity that urban design may generate is a little more subtle, and I call it choices. If we take a walk from point A to point B along this hypothetical street, we pass a certain number of buildings. And we can imagine that this could be in one of those tree plans that Kees was showing in suburban settings, or we could be in the city center. This is fundamentally different if the environment is such that it offers not only one route, but multiple routes to get from A to B. Now, what's in red is the same original route that we had before, but in addition, we have a couple of more routes that we could take and many more buildings that may be encountered on these routes. So if in the case of the first single route, which is the shortest path from A to B, we encounter almost 70 buildings on the way, by virtue of having these different choices that a grid offers, we now increase the number of buildings we potentially pass to 130, so it almost doubles. And it doesn't mean that we make a very long walk and pass all of them, but over a course of time, one day we choose one route, another day we choose another. Having these multiple route options in a built environment increases these likelihoods and offers us more diversity, offers us more access to such opportunities. So to conclude, what I think such empirical research and the use of some of the new computational methods in using mapping and empirical work allow us to do is to address some of the most fundamental questions of good urban design and put some numbers on it. And numbers are not always good for urban design. There's a lot of things that cannot be put in numbers, but sometimes the good thing is that numbers really work with developers and they really work with city governments, where we can provide evidence and actually describe a phenomenon and graph it and describe it quantitatively. And that's the real sort of benefit of entering this interdisciplinary discussion with these numbers and saying, hey, design actually really matters. Here's the evidence of what the difference is if you do this design versus that design. Second, It allows us to do more cross-disciplinary research across disciplines with different, even with engineers, transportation engineers. And I think there's really wonderful examples of that now already happening in Singapore through SUTD, ETH, NUS, and a lot of good cross-disciplinary research on cities coming out. Cities are fundamentally so complex that no discipline can ever tackle them alone. And I think this is very, very positive development. And finally, I think this empiricism that we may be re-entering in urban design allows us to bring urban design back to the sort of forefront and center of planning and built environment discussions. It has been pushed a little bit to the side, starting from the critique that Jane Jacobs brought about, etc. And I think when we bring more evidence into this question, we have a better chance of recentering urban design to what it probably should be. This is my last slide. I'll finish up by a rhetorical quote by Melvin Weber, which as architects and urban designers, we always need to be a little wary that we are always looking for these important patterns in the built environment. But I think Melvin Weber is right when he says that in fact it is interaction, not place, that is the essence of the city and of city life. And we can sometimes over-ascribe importance to built patterns and overlook some of the alternative ways of communication that now are available in today's world, like the internet, the phone, etc. And when we see cities develop beyond centers, like the one in Singapore, but also many other parts of the world, then certainly urban design competes with these other forms of communication, and proximity is not the only choice for interaction. And so these are some of the forces that future research needs to seriously take into account. Thank you very much.